Hey everybody, Who's Your Jedi here with another review for you. This time I'm talking episode 5 of The Flash called Plastique. And generally speaking, I call this a fairly solid episode, albeit one that has a rather kind of story at its heart. Basically, the story itself isn't all that great, but there's a lot of really cool character moments that go along with this story. And at the end of the day, I think that amounts to enough to call it a good. I mean, it's a very solid B episode. So anyway, the title of this episode is Plastique, and this is of course a reference to Bet Sansusi, who is the metahuman that Barry meets this episode, and immediately pretty much reveals his secret identity to. You know, it has been pointed out by some other fans that Barry is a lot less protective of his secret identity than Oliver Queen is. Although, if you actually stop and think about just how many people know that Oliver Queen is the vigilante, that I'm not really sure exactly how true that statement is. But Barry is much more quick to trust people. Let's put it that way. Anyway, now Plastique is a character from the comics that I'm not super familiar with. I do know that when she was originally introduced, she was actually a Quebecois terrorist. Of course, these days Canadian terrorists are just really not a thing. So changing her to being a member of the American military, I mean, it just makes sense. She was also introduced, I believe, in the Captain Atom comics, and they did a couple of nice little nods to that. For one, they mentioned that she's hanging out at the apartment of somebody named Cameron Scott. Well, Cameron Scott was an alias that Captain Atom, whose real name is Nathaniel Adam, as in Adam and Eve, used in his military activities. Nathaniel Adam was a military guy who got turned into a superhero. Also from the Captain Atom comics is Wade Eiling, who of course has a big role in this episode. We'll talk about him later. Now, in the comics, though, Plastique is generally just kind of a straight-up villain. Here, she's presented as basically someone who was, a good soldier who was ultimately ended up being victimized by Eiling, and thanks to the nasty influence of Harrison Wells, sort of tried to kill him. So basically, somebody who's really sort of just been abused by all the people around her, and ultimately ends up dying. And this really kind of goes back to what Joe said to Barry early on, is that you have to deal with the fact that you can't save everyone. So look at, here in this episode, Barry isn't able to save Bet's life. In an earlier episode, he was not able to stop Captain Cold from killing a guy, or from even getting away. So Barry is really having a lot of hard lessons on just what Joe said, that try as he might, he can't save everybody. And getting back to Bet, though, I mean, they did what they could with the character, but again, she was never really meant to be all that fleshed out. I mean, you can only do so much when you introduce a character in one episode and then they're dead by the end of it. Now, of course, this is a comic book show, so you never know. They could always bring her back at some point, but and I wouldn't really have a problem with that, but I just feel it sort of undermines what's supposed to happen with Barry this episode, that he's really supposed to get another lesson on how he can't save everybody. Which is, of course, got to be exceptionally painful for him, because earlier in this episode, he saved that window washer against really all odds. And I do like that they are really demonstrating more and more that Barry is just getting faster and faster. He's learning more and more about what he can do. Like this episode, he learns how to run up a building, how to run across water. And I do like that they are making at least a token effort of showing some of the science behind all of that. Flash is one of those comics where the writers would sometimes do some genuine research into physics and work those in there. It's actually been mentioned in the comics that there's this really great Justice League story where Wally West, Barry's successor as the Flash, is fighting an evil speedster, and this is written by Grant Morrison during his JLA run. And he talks about how when Barry was training him, he would sort of pull these sort of bits of knowledge and physics out of it and throw it at him, sort of teach him more about his powers. And Barry called them his flash facts. And Wally pulls some of those out and uses them to beat the evil speedster, and it's pretty darn spectacular. It's actually one of my all-time favorite moments during Grant Morrison's really, really awesome Justice League run. So I really would like it if they sort of did more things like that. I mean, not like Barry going flash fact and all that other stuff. I mean, it's not a kids science show. But again, just sort of at least making a token effort to sort of make a nod to real physics. I think that Flash is one of those characters that really lends himself to that sort of thing. Let's see, what else? I think I've said everything I have to say about Beth. So let's just go on and talk more about what's going on with Barry. And we've talked about how he's still learning that whole "you can't save everybody" thing. The other major thing that was going on with Barry this episode revolves around his relationship with Iris. And of course, the big reveal is that Iris is doing all this crazy stuff, blogging about the Flash, who she's going to be, at least until next episode, calling the Streak. And the whole sucker punch of it all being that she's doing this to sort of support Barry, to try and validate all this crazy stuff that he's believed in his entire life. And of course, Barry, at Joe's urging, tries to get her to back off on this, and this just results in Iris potentially destroying her journalism career before it even gets out of the gate. And I'm not really sure exactly what Barry thought he was going to accomplish by saying, I think we need to take a break from each other. It just sort of feels like at that point he's just trying to punish Iris for what she's done. I mean, that's really not going to accomplish anything. But yeah, and I did really enjoy that moment where Joe had, points out, Barry, of course I know you've been in love with Iris since you were old enough to know what love is. And Barry's just momentarily just horribly embarrassed by it all, and then he's just like, oh man, does everybody know? I mean, that was some good stuff. But what I really like there is that it shows us that Joe has never tried to play matchmaker. I'm sure he was probably tempted because, well, let's face it, Barry would be a really great guy to have Iris be with. I mean, there's no question in Joe's mind that he cares for her and that he wouldn't do his best to look out for her. But I think this is just an example of Joe realizing that he has to let Iris and Barry make their own decisions in life. He is basically their father, and him playing matchmaker just really would not be appropriate. So, tempted though he probably was, this is him sort of showing them the respect they deserve as individuals. So, some serious points to Joe there. Oh yeah, I also really like those scenes where Barry was interacting with Iris as the Flash, doing the voice thing and blurring his face. The interview on the rooftop, again, as people have pointed out, has an atmosphere very reminiscent of the interview that Superman and Lois Lane have in the original Superman movie from the 70s. With, of course, the late Christopher Reeve and Margot Kidder. Yeah, whatever. And I have to say, I really did like that scene. It's just, I wonder how this relationship is going to continue to evolve once, Iris really goes out there and full-on dubs Barry the Flash, which, considering that the title of the next episode is The Flash is Born, I'm pretty sure that's what's going to happen. But I kind of would think it would be interesting to see, simply because Barry is trying to basically said to Iris that he doesn't want to be around her as Barry Allen. But, it looks like him being able to interact with her as the Flash is still on the table. And again, that's another one of those things that's just going to twist the knife even further in poor Barry. Not a huge amount nothing particular to say about Caitlin this episode. Just that she had that really great moment with pulling out the blood sample thing, and Barry going, "You carry one of those around with you," and she goes, "You have your hobbies, I have mine." And then there's that really cute moment at the end where she basically invents, super booze for Barry to drink, and then he metabolizes it in about 10 seconds. Cisco, again, nothing really particular to say about him. Just that he continues to be a really nice source of comic relief. I mean, he's a hilarious guy. I do like that moment where Cisco kind of realized he was being very inappropriate with Bet, and just kind of goes, "Please don't leave." Poor Cisco desperately needs a girlfriend. Let's see, what else? Well, I guess that kind of brings us to the major bad guy of this episode, and that is, of course, General Wade Eiling. As I mentioned, he's originally a character from the Captain Atom comics, who basically kind of over time evolved in sort of a military antagonist for superheroes in general. And if you read the comics, basically even became a supervillain called the General. But I always thought he was stronger as just basically a military guy who was opposed to superheroes for various reasons. I think I remember. I can't remember if it was Eiling or if it was General Ross over in Marvel who sort of expressed some resentment towards superheroes because, for example, like Superman, bullets, bombs, Superman can laugh at those, but ordinary soldiers can't. And I think part of the motivation there was simply that they felt that just by their very existence, superheroes belittled military people. And speaking of which, I also saw at least one person complaining that this episode, which generally does not portray the military in the most favorable light, being aired on Veterans Day as disrespectful. Yeah, I'm gonna say that's complete and utter BS. I mean, come on, really? I mean, that's just going out there and finding something to complain about. But anyway, so here, Wade Eiling is played by none other than Clancy Brown. Outside of the comics, Eiling has appeared in an episode of Young Justice. He was a reoccurring character on Justice League Unlimited, where J.K. Simmons did his voice, and of course Simmons was J. Jonah Jameson in the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies. These days, he's Tenzin on Legend of Korra. But Clancy Brown, of course, has a really great pedigree of just geeky films and all that. He's, of course, probably among comic book fans best known as the voice of Lex Luthor on the 90s Superman cartoon and on Justice League. And I have to say, he's probably did one of the all-time great interpretations of Lex Luthor. Probably, in fact, my absolute favorite. I mean, not to take anything away from Michael Rosenbaum, who was did another phenomenal take on Lex, but that one right there, that to me really just always is Lex Luthor. And of course, Clancy Brown has a really great pedigree among geeky stuff. Most recently on television, he was the sheriff who served as Abby's mentor on Sleepy Hollow, and who can forget him as the Kurgan in the original Highlander movie from the 80s, which in my book is still the only good Highlander movie, albeit Highlander 3 did have its moments. But yeah, Clancy Brown, awesome actor. I even read an interview with him talking about the role, and he talked about the Red Hulk, General Ross is who General Ross in the comics actually turned into. He talked about how Wade Eiling turns into a supervillain in the comics, and just even kind of expressed that he didn't really think that either of those were very good ideas. So Clancy Brown is a man who knows his geek stuff. This man knows his comics, and by all accounts, in real life, he's actually supposed to be an extraordinarily nice fellow, who's just kind of scary looking and really good at playing villains. But basically, I love Clancy Brown. I mean, somewhere out there, I hope someone recruits this guy to do the voice of Sabretooth in some X-Men cartoon. That would be a dream come true for me. But long and the short, Clancy Brown in my book is awesome, and I am so happy he is on this show. But anyway, Eiling is not presented with a huge amount of depth here. I mean, he's basically a standard military bad guy. But I gotta give Brown a lot of credit. He really brings some serious gravity and just that real air of menace to Eiling. You can tell that this is not a guy you should screw with lightly. And he just, in the end, ends up killing Plastique. Now, granted, she was trying to kill him, but he had also been experimenting on her. The flashback with Harrison Wells revealed that he had been doing very questionable experiments, and if what we've seen from that whole Grodd thing, that he was totally cool with animal experimentation. And yeah, remember, it was specifically said that it was experimentation that was focused on mind reading. And of course, in the comics, psychic powers, including the ability to read minds, are one of the abilities that Gorilla Grodd has. And I really like that scene where he comes in there to Star Labs and tries to basically says, well, to Harrison Wells, I think we should start working together again. And you can tell that sort of that I think is just Wade being oddly polite. He's basically going to go in there and really trying to strong arm Harrison Wells. And even says, like, I can have a squad of soldiers here like that. I mean, never mind the fact that if a bunch of soldiers are running around, like, investigating explosions at office buildings that the entire city would have seen, and walking into a police station and taking evidence from the police, that there aren't going to be a whole lot of people going, hey, what the hell, Army? And I love how Harrison Wells even says, like, you do realize I can also have a squad of press here just like that. I mean, it really does show you that Eiling really is a very military guy, but he doesn't really have the ability to think in any way, shape, or form but throw soldiers at it. He's very not a real think outside the box kind of guy, apparently. But thinking outside the box, that's very much Harrison Wells' forte. So for now, Eiling is, well, basically he gets off scot-free. I mean, yeah, he didn't get Plastique, but he did kill her, and he was able to, probably cover up that explosion and all that successfully. So I have a feeling we'll be seeing him as an antagonist again later on. Getting back to Harrison Wells, though, I know just looking at the reaction online, I know I wasn't the only one who was really a little put off by how easily he was able to convince Bet to go out and try and kill Eiling. I mean, I know I even saw that other people were thinking the same thing I was, and were wondering, like, does Wells have some kind of mind control powers or something like that? Because, again, it took literally less than a 5-minute conversation to convince Bet to go out and murder someone. I mean, even if it was a bad guy like Eiling, who probably deserved it, that's a little bit too easy. And let me see. Anything else I have to say about this episode? Nope. I think that pretty much covers it. Again, pretty much a little weak on the overall story, but the character stuff was really nice. Alright guys, with that said, as always, please comment, rate, and subscribe, and of course you can follow me on Twitter at HoosierJedi. Until next time, take care and have a good one.